Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We'll get started, all of you who are on time, and actually Roger, who is early. Thank you. Um, I am Joanna Sinwell. I'm on the board of our NAMI, National Alliance for Mental Illness, here in Johnson County. And you're attending our monthly Lunch and Learn, which we have every third Wednesday of the month. And this month, we're excited to have Betsy Rippentrop with us. She is a licensed psychologist and certified yoga and meditation teacher who uniquely blends science, psychology, mysticism, and spirituality into her work. She courageously guides people into deeper awareness of their body and mind, and is especially adept at translating complex concepts into practical tools that can efficiently shift people. She owns Heartland Yoga and maintains a psychology practice focusing on integrated yoga into treatment. She is published on the relationship between spirituality and health, women's health, and chronic pain management, and is co-author of Chakra Healing, Renew Your Life Force with the Chakras, 7 Energy Centers, The Awakened Life. Her second book on yoga psychotherapy will come out next year. So join us today. Betsy's going to explore the connections between the body and the mind, specifically how psychology and yoga can work together to enhance our mental health. So thanks for joining, Betsy.
Thanks, Joanna, for that nice intro. I am excited to be here. This is one of my favorite things to talk about, and I love to share sort of the unique work that I do. I'm having searched for people doing similar work. There are just a handful of us around the country. And so, yeah, I'm happy to share this with my home state and people who are advocates for mental health. So I do have slides, and so I'm going to pull those up. I'm going to try to keep my chat open so that if you have questions as I go, please, type them in. We can certainly make this more interactive. I will definitely leave time at the end for conversation or questions as well. So let's do this. Okay. So we're going to talk about how sort of my unique training in psychology and yoga is the focus of how I help people bridge their mind and their bodies. I have lots of roles that I play. And not only do I do work one-on-one with people, I teach yoga, I do a lot of online trainings, teach a lot of meditation and yoga, and have a podcast where we talk about the wild woman archetype and how it relates to women and their mental well-being. So that might be something people are interested in. So this, after really a lot of study and a lot of, I would say, my own internal work and awareness, I'm really clear that one of the core reasons I'm here is to bridge these two disciplines that I love so much, the world of psychology and the world of yoga, to enhance the mental well-being of people. And clearly we have definitely post-pandemic entered a mental health major issues, right? And so I really feel, as I am very well versed in sort of the psychological literature, I am definitely a supporter of psychotherapy and medication. And I think we have to keep looking outside the box for other ways to work with people who have mental health issues. And yoga, to me, has been just a phenomenal resource. And I've seen so many people shift and change because of it. These are a bunch of the different online programs that I do, and I'll talk maybe more about these at the end, but I do an 8-week mental resiliency program every fall, just on many of the topics I'm talking about today that go much deeper. And then starting in January, I will offer again a 6-month certification program for people who are mental health professionals and or people who are coaches, yoga teachers, and we get much more in depth about how do you actually integrate these two disciplines. So it's a pretty in-depth dive into this arena. So these are the things that I'm going to work with today. I'm going to talk about the yoga philosophies that really shifted how I think about mental well-being. We're going to tie in a little neuroscience with some neuroplasticity. I'm going to talk about some of the research on yoga mental health. And then I'm going to dive into, at the end, the 6 factors that I think are why, and these are empirically supported, why yoga seems to be such a boon for mental health. And then if we have time, I get a lot of questions like, how do you do it? Do you roll out a yoga mat in your office? What does it look like? So if we have some time, I'll give you a little bit of a peek into actually how I work with people one-on-one. So I would say that my path is very circuitous. I started my undergrad pre-med. I always thought I would go to medical school, ended up really being so fascinated with psychology and specifically something called health psychology. So I went off to graduate school in health psychology in Chicago. That program wasn't quite what I was looking for, so I ended up transferring to Iowa and finished my PhD in counseling psychology in 2003. Following that, prior to that, I did a year-long internship at Rush Medical Center. And so all of my training was very much, I knew I wanted to work with the mind and the body. I was very sort of clear that that was going to be my focus, which is why I chose sort of this health psychology route. And spent a year working in the medical system, and then did a postdoc in the orthopedics department at the University of Iowa, working specifically with people with chronic back pain. Several years later, I found myself in private practice. And it was in this time, I started actually doing yoga personally during graduate school. And this was the late 90s. So 25 years later, there's a yoga studio in most towns. It's very part of sort of maybe what we would say it's more common. A lot of people have tried yoga. Late 90s, there was one yoga studio in the town of Iowa City. And yet somehow I found it, and I knew it was doing something to me physiologically that was helping me sort of survive the academic rigors of being in graduate school. And so I stayed consistent with, I would go once a week. And it wasn't until after I was sort of through my academic training, I was working in academic medicine and then transitioning to private practice, that I decided to do a longer training in yoga. And the reason I decided to do a longer training is, quite frankly, I was just fresh out of graduate school, maybe a year or two out of graduate school, and I was already feeling very limited by my profession. So here I'd spent, 7 years getting a doctorate. I'd spent thousands and thousands of dollars getting a doctorate. And I had almost like a dark night of the soul, feeling as if, wait a second, I'm trained to work with people from the neck up. I know how to do a clinical interview. I know how to do cognitive behavioral therapy. I know how to assess personality, but I don't really know how to get down into people's bodies. And I always have this sense that trauma and emotion and so much of what we could shift in terms of feeling better was in the body. And so this crisis of faith led me to begin to study yoga. And I always say I spent a decade essentially getting a PhD in psychology. And then I spent the next decade of my life traveling all over the country, studying with really well-known yoga teachers, learning the philosophies and the practices and really the depth in practicing myself. And now I'm definitely in the decade of integration, bringing these two disciplines together. And I really feel like in and of themselves, they're powerful disciplines. Yoga as a discipline is extremely powerful in shifting people's physical, mental, spiritual health. And so is psychology. But my experience is when you bring the two of them together, there's sort of an additive effect there. It's even more powerful when we work with these yoga skills, these yoga we might say practices like breath work and asana and meditation. And then we work with the psychological issues that seem to much more easily rise to the surface when you're doing these yogic practices. So this is where I am now. I am, funny enough, I started opened a yoga studio 15 years ago, but my private practice was next door. So I would come in dressed as a psychologist. I would at some point in the day go teach a yoga class and change my clothes. And then I would change back into my psychology gear. And it was about 10 years ago that I decided enough. I'm feeling very split. And it's at that point that I actually built a office in my yoga studio where I see clients one-on-one. And maybe you can see back there, there's a yoga mat back there, and I pull in yoga props consistently when I work one-on-one. So I feel in my own self much more settled now that I am doing a much more integrative practice, and I'm finding and seeing how useful and helpful it is for my clients. And so I would say most people coming to me now know of me as the yoga lady. And so most people are quite open to the integration of psychotherapy and yoga practices. So I was not at all the first person to think about, oh man, yoga and psychology go so well together. The great Carl Jung, who I've studied a lot in the 2 decades that I've been a practicing psychologist. He wrote this book, The Psychology of Kundalini Yoga, in 1932. So he was I thought I was ahead of my times in the late 90s. Carl Jung was way ahead of his times. And this is a quote from that book. You know, in the psychology of the unconscious, the body is always something like the earth. It is heavy, dense, a thing which cannot be removed, an obstacle. It is the here and now. For to be really in the here and now, one must be in the body. But we have peculiar faculty of stepping out of the body. And I would say Dr. Jung's insight into how the body is in the here and now, and the body is where we actually need to do the work, is exactly my perspective and exactly how I approach my clinical practice. So I'm very grateful. Just a side note, Dr. Jung went to India and met practicing yogis and learned philosophies from them. And when he came back to the West in the 1920s, 1930s, he said specifically that Westerners aren't ready for this yet. And he said that because he realized how powerful these yoga practices were, how powerful they were in terms of moving energy and opening up people's awareness. And so perhaps he was right that Westerners weren't ready in the 1920s and the 1930s, but 100 years later, I truly believe we are ready, and that actually people are hungry for this kind of work. So there are 2 particular, I was very curious about yoga poses, which is what we think of as yoga, but there are 8 limbs to yoga. So it's more than just poses. And what I was so curious about in all of my yoga training coming out of this PhD program is yoga philosophy, because I was learning so much about how yogis integrated the body and the mind so beautifully in a way that I didn't learn at all in my 10 years of psychology training. So I want to talk about 2 sort of core yoga philosophies that really shifted how I view my work in the mental health world as a psychologist. And the first thing is called the kosha model. Actually, this is what my second book is about. I'm in the process of editing and working on finding the right publisher. And so hoping that's going to come out in the next year. But this model is absolutely how I conceptualize clients and how I work with clients. It's also this kosha model. I won't go into this, but I myself had some health issues about 8-9 years ago, and I really used this model to work with my own sort of internal and physical healing. So this model says that as human beings, we don't just have one body, we actually have 5 bodies. Now, the physical body, which is called Annamaya Kosha, it's the black part of this visual, It's what we can touch. It's what we can see. It's our physical body. It's our blood pressure. It's, how we take care of our physical self. And this is a big aspect. In fact, the yogis say this is where you must start. If you want to heal, if you want to balance your system, you have to start in the body because it is the most dense and it's the easiest to work with. So besides physical body, the next layer out, that blue layer called pranamaya kosha, is our energy body. And I'm not going to go into all the ins and outs. I could talk for several hours on this. Energy, breath, the chakra system is in this level of the body. My first book is about that. So we have energy. Then the third layer out, manomaya kosha, this is the mind. So this is what I was trained in my PhD program, is how to work with the mind. But the yogis would say, well, if you don't start working in the body first, don't go to the mind first, you have to start in the body. So there's a very specific order here. Beyond the green level into this kind of golden yellow is called Vijnanamaya kosha, and this is called the wise mind. So we could think of this as the unconscious or subconscious mind. And the yogis say this is where our wisdom, our greatness, our sort of our unique perspectives on the world live. And then Anandamaya kosha, this final layer, is called the bliss body, meaning that we all have access to bliss. And that if we are regularly taking care of these other four aspects of ourselves, we are much more able to experience bliss, heightened experiences, joy, goodness. Now, if we aren't taking good care of those four layers, it's actually quite difficult to come into contact with our birthright of bliss. So this model really helped me see that, oh, if I'm going to work and apply this to my clients, we first have to, and this model comes specifically from yoga philosophy, we have to work in the body first. They call it firmness in the body. I don't mean that you have to be hard rock muscle firm, but you need to have a strong body that is able to then carry the next layer out, emotional stability. And we have an emotional stability, then the next layer out, we have mental clarity. And if we have mental clarity, then the next layer out, we have contact with wisdom. We can really tap into our wise self. And then one more layer out from that, wow, then we get into this bliss, this unveiling of our highest self, the soul. So this had a profound impact about how I really was thinking about people's well-being and sort of the order of things. That if I have someone coming into my office and I'm just working in the mind, I'm just trying to work with mental clarity, what about their bodies? We haven't even dealt with their body, and the body is the pathway in, is what the yogis would say. The other big philosophy that really helped me is, I call it the remember, forget model. It's this idea that we are both a human self and a higher self, and there's a continuum here. Our human self is the very dense part of us that gets overwhelmed by stress and yells at our kids and gets frustrated and drinks too much. And right, that's very human. But if we're doing consistent practices, yogic practices, we move up this continuum and we spend more time in high self. And high self is like the best part of all of us. It's goodness, it's joy, it's compassion, it's love, it's interconnectivity. But if we're not doing practices that help us move up that continuum, it's very easy to get stuck in human problems without sort of understanding we also have all this potential. So the yogis would say there's specific reasons for why we have imbalanced mental health. And then psychology has a different perspective. And of course, any of you who are working in the mental health field, yeah, when a client comes into my office and I'm doing an intake interview and figuring out what's going on, I am wondering about their genetics, their family history, their life experiences, past traumas. Of course, I'm taking in all that information. I also have this other sort of side of me that it's aware that when the yogis would say that the reason we get imbalanced is we feel separated from that higher self. We forget our true nature is one of expansion and well-being and compassion and connection. We also are disregarding our body And when we disregard the body, we develop something called karmic knots. The word in Sanskrit is grantis. And it's these pockets of tension, stress, tightness, repressed emotion. And all of us, like I have one in my right shoulder blade, I have one in my right SI joint. So we all, the older we are and the longer we're on this earth, we do develop these unprocessed areas in the body. But of course, yoga says we've got tools for how to free that up, but we have to work in the body first and foremost. The yogis would say the reality of the mind, and so this is the irony. Here I'm trained, know how to work with the mind, know the research on the mind. And when I did all this yoga training, I realized that their perspective on the mind is it's the most constricted aspect of who we are. So in that model, that kosha model, the mind, we can't necessarily trust the mind all the time because it's very tight and constricted. And the yogis say we can make 3 erroneous mistakes of the mind. The one is the belief that we're alone. The another is the belief that others are different. And this belief can lead to a lot of racism and sexism and disconnection because we look at other people and we make assumptions about who they are. And then third erroneous mistake is that you're powerless, that you have no agency. And these mistakes of the mind, yoga philosophy is 2,000 to 3,000 years old. And that's what my journey has been so fascinating, is that things that the yogis said thousands of years ago are now being sort of verified by science. And these 3 erroneous mistakes are verified now by the work of Dr. Rick Hansen, which are the idea of the negativity bias, that our brain is wired to overestimate threats, underestimate opportunities, and underestimate resources. So the yogis knew we have these erroneous ways of thinking. And now this current new research is saying, yeah, that's true. We all fall into this negativity bias, which we could also say on that continuum, lock us in that very human self realm versus remembering our larger, bigger potential. Now, the good news, and those of you who are interested in neuroscience, is we can rewire the brain. And research says that the 3 elements that help us rewire our brain or contribute most to neuroplasticity is rewiring the nervous system, practicing patterns, or doing something over and over and over. And the third thing is this idea of what wires together, fires together. Now, yoga really addresses all of these because yoga is a practice that definitely calms the nervous system. And this idea of patterns where, if you're practicing consistently, right, that's creating new patterns. And then this idea of what fires together, wires together. So I'm giving some examples underneath that of things that people learn in the yoga practice. So you feel intensity in your body and yet you stay with it. Or you experience anxiety and you realize, oh, I'm totally okay. I can stay solid even though I'm having anxiety right now. Another thing that I see a lot in my students is they come in really amped up. They come in, really overloaded with those stress hormones. And they learn through their practice that they can breathe through it and they can move more into this parasympathetic nervous system response. So one of the theories about why yoga seems to be so effective at improving people's mental health is that we're rewiring the nervous system, we're creating new patterning that's actually much more positive, and there's kind of consistent practice with it. I'm not going to bore you with all the data, but I just want you to know that there's a lot of data in the last 10 to 15 years on the effect of yoga on mental health. Some of the most exciting data is what's happening to our brains. We're having greater cortical thickness, which is, I love this picture because there's more bridges between our left brain and our right brain. And of course, the left brain is sort of that analytical, working in the office. The right brain is much more free. It's much more in the moment. It's much more in joy. And we know the practices of yoga and meditation are creating more bridges between these 2 parts of our brain, which allow us to be in more joy, have more expansion, have more freedom. So I want to take a little bit of time because I know I'm going to try to wrap this up in 9 minutes. I want to talk about the 6 ways that yoga enhances mental health. And these are sort of coming from the empirical literature. And these are the 6 things that I teach in this course I call Remind. And I've taught it, I don't know, 8 or 10 times. We always teach it in the fall. Fall tends to be a really hard time of the year for anxiety. And there's research that supports that. This is also really coming out of the yoga tradition. And so I do an 8-week course teaching people mental resilience based on these 6 things. And so I just want to give you a little taste of what these 6 things are and why they're so powerful. So the first thing that we know why yoga has such an impact on our mental well-being and resiliency is we learn to inhabit the body. And that's all that philosophy I was talking about, is that yogis are saying you have to start in the body. You have to start in the body. So if I have a client who is not taking care of themselves, not sleeping, drinking a ton of soda, not taking care, not eating good foods, it doesn't matter what great insights we get in psychotherapy, their capacity to really shift and change and move to a better mood state is limited because their body is basically in a somewhat toxic place. So we have to learn to inhabit the body, which is be present in the body, listen to the body. If we're actually not numbed out and listening to our bodies, it tells us when to eat. It tells us when we need to go to sleep. It tells us when we need to use the bathroom. The body is very self-regulating and very wise. It also knows how to heal itself. But if we have become so numbed out in our lives, which is very, very common, I will also not, I teach a lot on trauma. I'm not going to go into this in this moment, but if people have a lot of experience of trauma, especially early on in their life, they most likely are not in their body because their body doesn't feel safe. We know in some recent research by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk that we store trauma in the tissues of the body. We store that repressed emotion and memory in the body. And the yogis, remember, called that grunties, these karmic knots. And so it can be scary for people to even think about feeling their body, listening to their body. We also hold emotion in the body. So when we go into the body, you're going to face your feelings, that they're going to be right there. But this, again, is the pathway to healing. We have to go through the body. We have to work with the body. We have to feel the body. We have to listen to the body. We have to talk to the body. That's a lot of the therapy I do, is helping people converse and be in deeper contact with the physical sensations in the body. The second thing yoga does that really helps with this mental resilience is we start to understand the connection to the rhythms and cycles of nature. So there's a sister science to yoga called Ayurveda, and this is very much about lifestyle, diet, sleeping, movement. And through this system of knowledge, there's a lot of guidance and recommendations that we should be eating differently in the fall than the spring. Fall is a time for heightened anxiety. Spring is a time for heightened depression based on some of these models. And so when we start to understand that and get into the rhythms of nature and get into the rhythms of good sleep cycles, we tend to feel significantly better. And so there's a lot of beautiful guidance on how to align more with cycles. As I've already alluded to, yoga is phenomenal for balancing the nervous system. And in this course, we talk a lot of ways to balance the nervous system. It's not just, again, yoga postures. There's a lot of chanting. So you see this little guy singing here. Even we know based on research, buzzing, bzzz, or humming or singing, these all change our nervous system. They calm us down. We talk a lot about even just simple rocking forward and back like this is extremely soothing for the nervous system. Breath work, we're going to get into that in a moment, is also key. So we talk a lot about why our nervous systems are so out of whack. And again, there's also some beautiful new theory and research that mental health disorders may be more a function of a dysregulated nervous system. So if we can help someone regulate their nervous system, learn how to calm their own nervous system, that may be a bridge to, again, improving mental well-being. The fourth thing is regulating breathing. So there's one of the limbs of yoga. Again, there's 8 sort of limbs of yoga. One is called pranayama, which is breathing. So one of the beautiful things that I've learned to do in all this yoga training is really work with the breath. And in the yoga tradition, there's breath to calm us. There's breath to energize us. There's breath to balance the left and right hemispheres of the brain. So when you teach people, and again, teaching people breath techniques is very simple, can be done clinically in an office if you're a mental health professional. I have seen astounding results with teaching people how to breathe in a conscious way. And one of the first things I teach people is that diaphragmatic belly breathing. Someone's been in high stress. Again, they're living in a really dysregulated nervous system. They're for sure a chest breather. They're breathing into their chest instead of their abdomen. In fact, you can just do a little check-in with yourself right now. When you breathe, does your chest lift or does your belly expand and lift? It should be your belly. But for far too many of us, if we've lived in stress for decades and years, we don't even know that we're not taking in as much oxygen as we could. And this could also be impacting our mood. So breath is one of the quickest ways, according to the yoga tradition, to shift our mood, to change our moods. Another core thing that seems to be so effective is teaching people mindfulness, learning how to be in the moment, right now, right here. And I would even just encourage you right now to feel your feet on the ground, feel your hands in your lap. Listen to the sounds around you, like land just for a moment right here. It's a practice. And again, our brains are going to want to pull us all over the place. There's always something to check on our phone. There's always an email to attend to. In fact, these are really impacting us, right? They're sort of anti-mindfulness. And so I do believe we have to be engaged in practices that really teach us and remind our system how to land right here, right now. And the 2 things that really help people land in the present moment are being in touch with their body or being in touch with their breath, because your body's just here right now. You're not in your 10-year-old body, and your breath is right here, right now. You know, you can't take an extra breath for somewhere down the line, right? So this is a big focus of not only how I teach yoga, but the treatment I do with people is really helping them land in their body or connected to their breath. And there's a very interesting, what would we call it? A very interesting outcome is that when we're in the present moment, when we're in our body or with our breath, we're suffering less. We suffer because we're still replaying 10 years ago. We're stuck in the past, or we suffer because we have all this anxiety and worry and fear about the future. But right now, right here, like if we're really landed in the present moment, usually we're fine. We're okay in this present moment. And then the last thing we work on in yoga is creating new narratives. What we know in the research is that when a body is relaxed, the nervous system is regulated, the breath is steady, the mind is much more open to new ideas, new narratives, new healthy ways of being. So there's a beautiful opportunity after calming the nervous system to then think about, like, how do I want to be? So if I have a client come into my office and they're anxious and they're panicky and they're not breathing well, there's no way that we're going to have a conversation about what's going on in their lives. Because even if we come to some great, amazing insight that they need to know, they will not remember it. When your system and your nervous system is in fight, flight, freeze, the part of your brain that actually can remember things goes offline. And so I know through all of this training that I have to help my clients get calm and steady and breathe and settle and center before any kind of good psychotherapy can happen. So we do a lot of breathing, a lot of relaxation in my office. So this is actually not my office, but people will say, like, how do you do this? How do you do this? I'm in my office right now. So I do have a couch and I have a chair, just like a typical psychologist office, but I have yoga mats back there. I have props out here. And often what we'll do is I'll put people in a restorative yoga pose, and we'll work with the breath, and we'll calm the nervous system, and we'll work with a little meditation. And then from there, we move into intensity or sensation, stuckness in the body. And wherever they're feeling stuck in their body, ironically or not so ironically, it's always connected to what's going on emotionally, mentally for them. So my therapy always starts in the body, and then we move into the emotional, mental, psychological stuff, but we move to it through the body versus starting in the head and just staying up here. So if we just live from the neck up, we don't live as full of a life. And I know that I lived because of some early trauma in my history. That's why I got a PhD, right? Because I had to live from my neck up for most of the time. And yet I know that now that I've learned to pull my awareness, my energy, my life force down into my body, I feel better. I am better. I'm clearer. I am having a fuller life instead of when I just live from the neck up. So that's the work I do. If you would like to get involved with some of the work, I most likely will be doing this Remind program in the fall. I also have had the opportunity to work with some grant funding to offer a free program to women. And so we're in the midst of working towards that again. And our theme for this program, the Tend Her program, is going to be resilience. And because of the grant funding, if we can get it, it's offered to 1,000 women for free. So we're hoping that works out again. That'll happen in the fall. And then if you are a mental health professional and might like to do some more in-depth training, if anything I said today resonated with you, or you also have that feeling of like, oh, I'm tired of just working from the neck up, I would love to have you join me in this 6-month certification program. I'm just going to type in the box for everyone to see my email, info@heartlandyoga.com. And then actually, probably the best place to stay on top of everything is my website, dryogamama.com. And then last but not least, these are things that I do that much of them are free. So you can jump on. I do Wisdom Wednesday, the first Wednesday of every month. It's an online conversation just like this. It's slides, it's me sharing. We've done them on trauma, resilience. We've done them on well-being. So there's all kinds of different topics. The next one will be the first Wednesday in August. I have a free Saturday yoga online. If you come in person, you pay, but you can do it online with me, and you can find out about that at heartlandyoga.com. I do a podcast called Tend Her Wild. So there's a new episode that releases every week. And then I teach a lot internationally. I do a lot of retreats, and I have 3 coming up: Ireland, Costa Rica, and Peru. So if you want a little deeper, in-depth sort of work with me, feel free to join. So I am moving out of my slides and into any conversations that people might have, questions, comments. You can type it in the chat box, or I don't know how this Zoom is set up. You might be able to unmute and speak up.
Yeah, if you just unmute yourself, you can join in the conversation. That
So
was
Margo,
really-
you said, how do you get information about the grant program? So we don't know if we're getting the grant yet. We're in the middle of writing it. So if you if you're on Facebook, we have a Tend Her, and I'll put this in the chat, Facebook page that you can join. Also, if you just maybe get on the newsletter on Heartland Yoga, so if you go to heartlandyoga.com, join the newsletter, or dryogamama.com, you'll be on our newsletter, and we'll for sure be putting it out. We'll be putting it out on social media too. So you should be able to hear about it. We should know, I think, in the next month, and then the program will likely start in October. And then the podcast is tendherwild.com. Is the website, but anywhere you listen to podcast, if you type in Tend Her, 3 separate words, Wild, you'll find the podcast. And we've recorded about 70. This week, I'm really excited. We're interviewing a psychologist named Dr. Ariel Schwartz. She's very well known, does a lot of work with trauma and complex PTSD. So she's coming on this week to talk with us. Any other questions?
So fascinating, really.
Questions?
Oh, I have a quick question. This is Margot. I was just wondering how you got your podcast going and your website and stuff, and what that process was like for you.
Oh man, I know. This is the thing. It's like, not only am I a psychologist and a yoga and meditation teacher, but you have to learn and become an entrepreneur when you sort of go off into doing these things on your own. So I can tell you that Running Robots, which is I love to support local business. Running Robots, they're local in Iowa City. They've helped me from the beginning with all of my different websites, and they are amazing. So for sure, go check out Running Robots. And then I tell you, the podcast has been an education. We've been doing it over a year. I do it with a colleague who's actually a lawyer and a business CEO. And so we're really like good combination, because she's got this whole business entrepreneurial side. I'm more the touchy-feely psychologist side. And our goal is to interview women and to really talk about rewilding is the concept. We're actually doing a TED Talk on this in October as well. But rewilding is this concept that, we're talking about rewilding sections of the land, letting them go back to their natural land, the way they naturally were. And we sort of believe it's the same idea with humans, that we need to rewild and go back to our natural essence. So this isn't wild in a pejorative sense. It's not like a, go wild, break all the rules. It's more like, no, who are you? And how did you lose that in the conditioning of your family or your upbringing, or what, how did you lose that? So we're talking to a lot of people and women about how they sort of got out of the proverbial boxes and moved into a more, what we would say, authentic, real version of themselves. But we do work with a podcast company because it's a lot of editing and it's a lot of equipment. And so they are also local, Executive Podcast Solutions. And so they've been instrumental in helping us get it going. So it's more work than I ever thought, but it's fun. I get to talk to really interesting people, and I'm really enjoying it despite the extra time it's taking. And I also have 3 kids. So, like life is busy.
It's really cool to, I guess I'll put it this way, think about your body first before the mind. And then kind of, it's like, what a concept.
I know. And isn't it crazy that I specifically went into health psychology because I knew I wanted to bring the body in. But I remember there were no real philosophies, and there's some new mental, like I think there's some newer like DBT and acceptance commitment do a little bit more with the body. But yeah, it's like the body is the pathway in. You have to make sure the vessel that you're in is functioning well, because we all know we've all been sick, we've all had pain, and you cannot be in a good mental space when you're sick or not, your body isn't functioning well. So it's been a game changer for me to really understand that we have to move into the body first. And that's why integrating a little bit of yoga, I never teach like yoga to my clients. It's much more restorative work, but helping them learn, where am I tight? Where am I tense? Where am I holding? And then can I learn to release that? So it's beautiful work. I love the work. I also will say that the work is more efficient than when I'm just working from the neck up. It's not that you can't do good work working from the neck up, but I find that people move through things quicker and more efficiently when we're bringing in more of the somatic part of it as well. And that's been a real pleasant surprise to see how quickly people can release and move through things when we're working in the body.
That's awesome.
I'm reminded of the book, The Body Keeps the Score.
Yeah. Yeah, he's been one of my primary teachers, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. Yeah, The Body Keeps the Score. It's one I think every mental health professional should read. It's a thick, heavy read, but it's powerful. And
Right.
he's done a lot of the pioneering work and research on yoga for PTSD.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I also wanted to mention that our agency has been fortunate to be able to utilize what's called ecotherapy training. There's an agency, local agency here called Backyard Abundance that has hired a few licensed therapists, and they do some ecotherapy trainings, and they're really cool. There's a grounding and things like that, and just really different ways to think about approach things. I guess really is
Yeah.
I know they also have a class with a yoga component to it as well. So it's just really super neat to. And also now
Yeah,
this class kind of complements that too.
I just heard about Backyard Abundance this week. So someone just sent me a link to them. So yeah, and it's this idea. I actually think, I mean, being in this mental health crisis that we are, I want us to as mental health professionals and just as a culture to think about how do we expand, because yoga and therapy, while they are the gold standard, we're still in crisis. It's not necessarily enough. So are there other things we can add in, such as time in nature, moving the body, and even therapeutically? There's some really interesting research on therapy while walking, and that for some people that's a more effective way than sitting right across from somebody and going into sort of vulnerable spaces. So I feel like us expanding our idea about how we work with mental health is really necessary and timely right now.
I agree. The problem is maybe not enough therapists. There's plenty of issues and help needed, but I think there's that crisis, I guess I'll call it.
Yeah. And also I agree, we need more therapists, but also are there other things that don't require a licensed therapist that people can be doing that bolster their mental well-being? But yes, I'm all for getting more therapists. We need them.
We
Yeah.
need to pay them more.
And we need to pay them more because it's hard, heavy work. You all know that.
Right.
Yeah.
Really
Great.
appreciate you doing this class. It's really a joy being here.
Thank you for inviting me. And yeah, if you have any questions, reach out to me. Would love to hear from you. And thanks for the opportunity.
Well, thank you so much. Next month, we're going to talk about tardive, and I always get the word wrong. It's TD, where it's kind of a movement issue that people who take strong antipsychotic medication.
Dyskinesia.
Dyskinesia.
Tardive dyskinesia.
Tardive dyskinesia. And so we're going to have a nurse come talk to us about ways to treat it. So that's going to be very useful. And then later on in the fall, we're going to have some more folks from our brain sciences group in the university come talk to us, and lots of interesting things. So please join us. Look for invites on the NAMI invite, and join us on social media. We have an Instagram page, a Facebook page, and of course we have a YouTube channel where all of these lunch and learns have been placed. So thank you so much for joining us and for your support of NAMI.